Farm Progress Broadcast presents This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry. Brought to you by Case IH. Solutions for every challenge. Equipment for every farm. Case IH, built by farmers.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us here for This Week in Agribusiness. I'm Mike Pearson. Well, politicians in Washington, D.C. might be a long way from a sale barn. They still find time to do some horse trading. And that's been on display over the past several weeks as they've worked to pass a version of the big, beautiful bill out of both the House and the Senate. Joining us now to talk about the final product is Secretary of Agriculture Brooke Rollins. Secretary Rollins, thanks for joining us this week.
Oh, great to be with you, and hope everything is great with you.
Absolutely. We've certainly got a lot to talk about. We've got one of the most expensive pieces of legislation ever in American history moving towards the finish line, and agriculture's got some priorities in here. From your perspective, what are some of the big wins for the ag industry in this piece of legislation?
Well, first of all, I think that this big, beautiful bill, as my boss, President Trump, actually we talked about naming it that years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, when we discussed hopefully another win for him in 2024, and then the opportunity to effectuate his vision for America. And that's what this bill really does. I mean, you and I are going to talk today about farming and ranching and what it does for our agriculture community. But listen, this bill secures the border. This bill gives an average of $10,000 back to the American taxpayer in tax cuts. This bill includes real education opportunity. It's just one promise after another that the president has made through the years that is kept in this bill. So I'm really proud of it. As far as the farming and the ranching goes, it's been, I just couldn't be more proud of the effort made in this bill, from our president to the key Senate leaders and the key House members like D.T. Thompson and Senator Bozeman and others, to really work to put farming and ranching and agriculture back at the top of the list. I think in the last administration, USDA got out of line a little bit and started really focusing on things like DEI and a woke agenda. But now it's about back to our farmers and our ranchers. 2 million family farms under this bill will be kept from getting the death tax, the inheritance tax, which of course we know destroys multi-generational farms. This bill has 100% expensing, which for our farmers and ranchers is such a big deal. 100% expensing. It includes a $3.8 billion increase in the programs that will help our ag industry. It includes increasing the reference prices. Finally, a lot of things that needed to be done in the Farm Bill under the Biden administration that never got done. $10 billion in tax cuts. Of course, the ultimate small business owner in America. That really is our farmer or our rancher. So there's just a tremendous amount of good in this bill specifically for our people, Mike. And again, I just couldn't be more proud.
Well, and you mentioned the challenges getting a farm bill across the finish line over the past couple of years, incorporating some of those components into this bill. Well, one thing that has been watched closely is the 45Z tax credit. I understand the big, beautiful bill would keep restrictions on foreign feedstocks being used to make biofuels. Is that right?
I think that's right. It's changed multiples of times, but the latest version that I have would show that to be the case. And again, just ensuring, it's interesting. Just earlier today, I had one of the top leaders of the British, the UK Parliament, and of the Prime Minister team over there, and we were talking about the trade deal. I know you and I are talking about the bill right now, but just very quickly on trade. And just this week, the UK through Parliament basically effectuated the president's trade deal. And for our ethanol and beef producers, that is a massive win. Basically, America and our corn producers are now going to supply ethanol in total to England. And our beef producers are finally going to get a fair shake over there and with our friends across the pond.
Certainly no shortage of big issues to discuss in Washington, D.C. Secretary of Agriculture Brooke Rollins, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here this weekend. Our market segment this week is brought to you by Farm Futures. Keep up with these volatile commodity markets at farmfutures.com. This week, we're talking with Mark Rosenbaum. He's the Senior Grains and Oilseeds Analyst over at Terrain. Mark, thanks for making the time to talk with us this week.
It's great to be here with you.
So we have had traders had a week now to break down some of those reports from last Monday from the USDA. Of course, we got the acreage report. We had the quarterly grain stocks report. Many traders were watching these for indications about what's to come. On the acreage report, Mark, were there any surprises for the trade?
No, the numbers came in relatively neutral. What otherwise could have been one of the more volatile trading days of the year was largely pretty quiet. We saw corn area come in at 95.2 million acres, just fractionally below where the average was. And then we saw soybean areas come in at about 83.4 million acres, likewise, just fractionally below where I think average expectations were.
As you take a look at those numbers compared to your analysis, talking to growers across the country, breaking down all the results, do those acreage numbers feel right to you?
Yeah, I think they feel right in the ballpark. We saw good weather over spring, and I think one of the major takeaways that I took from it was that, farmers actually got to plant what they said they intended to plant. And so by and large, that was good. There were a couple things that I noticed at the kind of towards the front and back of the report that caught my attention. That there were about 3.6 million acres of corn left to plant yet. So all of what they reported is not actually in the ground. And then on the soybean side, there were 11.5 million acres left to plant. That was down a little bit from last year. So that's good on total. But one thing that caught my attention was that they indicated that there's maybe a higher proportion of double crop soybeans that folks intended to plant this year, that to the extent that those are part of that 11.5 million acres left to plant, whether now over the past 2 weeks since the survey wrapped up, and then over the next week or so, are probably could be important for where that final soybean number comes in at.
All right, so more to watch there on this acreage battle. Of course, it's not done until it's done. But Brian, that's looking ahead to what could be coming out of the ground this fall. And quarterly grain stocks, the other report looks backwards. How has demand been? Were there any surprises on the quarterly grain stocks report that came out last Monday?
From my perspective, nothing too surprising. We saw wheat about 851 million bushels, soybeans a little over a billion. But from my perspective, nothing super surprising stood out.
Well, that's good news. So we do have the demand out there. We're seeing that that stays strong on the corn side in particular. As you look out, Mark, over the remainder of this summer, what's your advice to producers watching that corn in the field right now, that new crop corn?
Yeah, as I sit here and look at it now, we have both corn and soybeans that are rated very well. We do tend to see some seasonal decline in those ratings. So, even if we do see a small decline going forward, that's not necessarily anything to get too worried about. That is part of the seasonal trend. The one area that I'm watching is, July and August weather. These crops look good so far, but they're not made yet. And so while I would like to think I have an idea what July weather might be, I would be lying to anybody to say that I know exactly how that's going to come out. So there is still risk there to both the corn and soybean crop that warrants watching over the next month and a half, 2 months.
That's true. We are just getting into that key pollination season for corn, beans. It'll be here before we know it. And folks, when we come back, we'll have more of a conversation with Mark about what is happening in these commodity markets and what risks and potential tailwinds he's watching as we get closer to harvest. Our market segment this week is brought to you by Farm Futures. Keep up with these volatile commodity markets at farmfutures.com. And we're back talking with Mark Rosenbaum, the senior grains and oilseeds analyst over at Terrain. Mark, you mentioned the trade wasn't terribly surprised by those reports that came out last Monday. So now we're focused back on those traditional weather and demand type markers. On the wheat side, we've got harvest moving along here for this winter wheat. Is there any indication that we could see additional tightness in wheat supplies throughout the summer?
So I think there's a chance at least the USDA tightens up the wheat balance sheet a little bit. We saw old crop stocks in the year at about 850 million bushels. And then they brought down their estimate of winter wheat area a little bit. So there's a chance they'll either bring yield up if they want to hold their production estimate or tighten up the balance sheet a little bit if they're happy with their yield, and they'll bring total winter wheat production down a little bit.
All right, could see some more variability there on the wheat front. Now, of course, while we've got you on the line, we are seeing harvest going on right now. Of course, it's happening across Brazil, not too much up here on the corn side in the United States. But with that Brazilian corn harvest, it's expected to be bigger. Mark, is it going to make its way into the international export market, or will that crop stay in Brazil, do you think, with for their demand?
Yeah, so probably a little bit of both. We have seen their production estimates continue to creep up a little bit and indicate that they have a pretty sizable crop down there. And so that would, and has, I think, to some extent, weighed on global corn prices. I think the one area of optimism I see a little bit is, as they expand their ethanol blending, they're going to use a little bit more of that corn at home. And I think that's at least not bad news for us. With a large crop, the more consuming, it may be somewhat neutral on the export side, but it's not all going to hit the world market. So I see that as a little bit friendly.
We won't have 100 million tons coming to directly compete with American harvest. That is always good news. Now, of course, as we look ahead to harvest here in the United States, it will be here before we know it. We've had ample moisture across much of the Corn Belt. It's a little early, but that could mean we might need additional drying as we get into harvest. Mark, are there anything farmers should be doing right now to prepare input cost-wise for this fall?
Yeah, so as I look out to fall, markets seem to indicate that propane prices are going to rise into fall, and so to the extent that folks have the ability to store or can secure those prices to some extent, it may be worth starting that conversation now and seeing what sort of offers they can get. On the diesel fuel side, it looks like we've seen prices run up with crude as things have happened in the Middle East. But looking forward, those prices, at least currently, are expected to come back down a little bit into fall. So that could be some good news for producers there.
All right, so propane now might be the time to act. Diesel fuel, maybe you've got a little while as this Middle East tension starts to subside a little more. Is that the way you're understanding the market? That's
my current assessment. Yep.
All right. Now, as you think about dollar value, we've seen that come down a little bit. That's helped American ag exports. Is that going to be a tailwind that's with us for the remainder of this summer, do you think?
Yeah, I think the outlook for what exactly the dollar index is a bit challenging, a bit uncertain. But definitely, like you mentioned, it has been, and on total is positive for U.S. ag exports. And that's a good thing. I would welcome that, any help we can get there on the currency side.
That's so true. Anything we can do to drive more of those bushels out to global demand, that helps shrink our carryout here at home. Mark Rosenbaum, thank you so much for taking the time to fill us in on what you're watching in the week ahead.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Agriculture meteorologist Greg Solier now brings us his farm weather forecast for the week ahead.
This weather segment is brought to you by SprayTech, making your spray applications effective and convenient. Use it once, trust it always. Yes, Greg Solier has been watching those maps and charts. And Greg, out in the Pacific Northwest, it sounds like heat and fires have been the name of the game.
Yep.
Is that the trend as you look forward?
Yeah, basically so. It's these dry-based thunderstorms. And by the way, nice to have the SprayTech people on board here at This Week in Agribusiness. And yeah, it's a pretty seasonal setup, really, almost everywhere across the country. No big headlines. If you've had rain, you'll get a little more rain. Rain sometimes get a little bit heavy. That's the way it goes with the weak steering currents up aloft. And typically this time of the year, it's these dry-based lightning-producing type thunderstorms than anything. So we'll keep an eye on that with kind of a weak progression of weak weather systems. Nothing of a headline nature until you get into maybe a couple of gusty thunderstorms early to middle part of the week across the Dakotas. Topsoil moisture shortages. That's the story. Washington State and Oregon, 65 to 75% short and very short. But this time of the year, you just don't get a lot of organized moisture. That's the story here for the end part of the week. The ridge reestablished itself. It really retrogresses from the Corn Belt, the plains, back into the western states. And in the transition, somewhat cooler, drier air, maybe a couple of thunderstorms into the plains. Again, nothing out of control except for the lack of organized moisture, but that's normal for the time of year into the Pacific Northwest. A little spurious weather system offshore, up aloft, some mid-level clouds into the valleys of California. They may temper temperatures a bit, though, 110 to 115 parts of the Imperial Valley. The monsoon season is robust. New Mexico, West Texas, Colorado, and a little westward movement now into Arizona. A couple of thunderstorms into the plains. Boy, parts of Kansas and Nebraska, big rain and storms. That has slowed up winter wheat harvest over the past week to 10 days. Very little change. The heat kind of reestablishes itself here. Just imagine triple-digit readings, dew points in the 60s Yeah, we light up thunderstorm activity in the desert southwest. Watch the flash flooding. Some of those will work into the plains from time to time, and they will, per usual, be heavy and severe according to the early July calendar date.
Well, taking a look at severe weather, I know the central part of the U.S. has seen its share so far this summer. Greg, does that look like that trend will continue?
Yeah, it's these slow-moving storms, the jet stream pattern weekends. You get these storms in clustered fashion. They kind of take on a mind of their own, and all of a sudden, over a 2 or 3 day time frame like we had last week down here towards Bloomington, Indiana, the lower Wabash, about 7 inches of rain, some spots through southern Wisconsin, northern Illinois, an inch or two. But again, they had some dryness and drought-related issues there. So here it is, some seasonal heat and humidity as we head on through the early part of the week. A couple of gusty thunderstorms. Note the warm, dry air, lower humidity and dew points will settle on southward. A couple of showers up towards the Sioux. Back to optimum outdoor work conditions and scouting the fields across the Corn Belt as the heat temporarily retrogrades along with the storms back westward, west of the Missouri later on into the week. Ohio Valley, yeah, they get rains, and sometimes it's the Rio Grande they get rains. And this is a kind of a tropical feed into South Texas up the Rio Grande. Then we tap into the monsoon setup over the desert southwest. That's pretty much normal for the time of year. Some heat into the Ohio Valley, the Delta region, and at least we're getting some drier soils across sections of the Cotton Belt. That's good news, but the storms are back into play here. No tropical systems, but it's a moisture-laden air mass into the Rio Grande Valley. A couple of thunderstorms, too, across parts of Kansas and Oklahoma. What drought into parts of the southern plains?
Well, and do you expect this moisture to push its way all the way to the East Coast, Greg?
With time in the weeks to come, I think we will tap into that southeastern wet weather system. We'll talk about that in just a second. Here's a frontal boundary strung out, slow to move along with the clusters of showers and thunderstorms. Normal heat and humidity for early July. We do get into a more comfortable air mass. Keep some of the shower activity late in the week into the northeast and New England. Less humidity. You'll feel mighty fine with outdoor work. And over the southeastern states, just a tropical circulation, nothing named so far. We're keeping an eye on the Atlantic Basin, but even there, very quiet. I know we're early on into the season, but the fetch of moisture continues on northward with scattered showers and thunderstorms continuing on over the southeastern part of the country. Southern plain states areas, it's heat and humidity. It's a typical July setup. And as we head through the late part of the week, again, a little weak circulation, nothing named, no wind issues, but heavy downpours. There'll be some big rain totals with time over the southeast. Nice to see rains down through Florida as the drought pattern winds on down, and per usual, heat and humidity into the southeastern part of the plains, scattered showers and thunderstorms as well. So a little more rain across the Cotton Belt country. It has been a wet springtime and early summertime. That trend continues on much of this week.
Closed captioning this week is brought to you by Farm Progress. Their team of experts reports on innovative solutions and essential information for your farm business. Visit farmprogress.com to stay updated. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You know, across the economy, when we go through big changes like we're seeing with this change in administration and our trade policy, there's a lot of different ways to figure out what's happening on the ground. One of the most important ways to do it is with surveys of business folks and industries who are hit by these changes. Well, across rural America, two of the most compelling surveys of consumer sentiment are put together by the Center for Business Inquiry at Creighton University. It's directed by Dr. Ernie Goss, longtime economics professor there at the university. Dr. Goss, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Good to be with you, Mike.
Now, of course, out this week, we've got the newest information from the Mid-America Business Conditions Survey. Dr. Goss, what are you seeing in that survey? What are the respondents telling you for the month of June?
Well, this is, of course, a survey of supply managers and manufacturing supply managers in what we'll call nine mid-America states, stretching right down the middle of the country. And the June survey, which has just come out, shows an economy that's limping along, I'll call it, expanding, but not with any jobs, still losing jobs. The nine mid-America states lost about 1,100 jobs over the last year, and that's 0.7%. The U.S. manufacturing economy lost equivalently in percentage-wise, but about 80,000 jobs. So the manufacturing sector is losing jobs, but overall output is growing. In other words, higher productivity. So that's the good part. Supply managers did report that tariffs were having an impact, but more of an impact at their level. In other words, the higher tariffs are squeezing profit margins. So at this point in time, they're not being handed off to consumers to any large extent. So we are seeing it in terms of profit margins for those manufacturers.
Now, are those tighter margins, is that being reflected in sort of diminished expectations about the future performance of these industries, Dr. Goss, or do they anticipate this to be a blip that we'll come out of soon?
It is. The confidence index is just not good. Looking ahead 6 months, these supply managers expect prices to continue to expand about 7.5 percentage points. That's across the entire 2025. So about 3.5% over the next 6 months in terms of their prices, the prices they pay. Now, the question is how much of that will be passed on to consumers? At this point in time, not significantly, but the Federal Reserve, headed by Jay Powell, says, oh, we got to worry. We can't reduce rates right now. We're concerned about those that pass off in terms of higher prices.
Now, that's a really good point. And as I look at the other survey that you conduct, the Rural Main Street Index, of course, that'll come out the middle of the month, data gathering ongoing for that. But with that survey, you're talking specifically, primarily to rural lenders. Is that accurate?
That's right. These are bank CEOs in rural areas of 10 states, almost the same states. There, we do add in Southern Illinois and Colorado and Wyoming to what we call the Rural Main Street Survey. And as you said, it comes out the third Thursday of the month. And what we're seeing there, we just saw an uptick above growth neutral for the highest level in 2 years. Now, I'm just not that positive we're going to continue to see that because agricultural income, what we're seeing there, exports remaining very weak right now. And that's true in manufacturing as well. When you look at exports, not imports, exports, we're seeing those as very weak, pull back there, and maybe that's some retaliation from some of our trading partners. But nonetheless, the bankers are telling us things sprang up there the last month. Now, I don't expect that to continue, though. Livestock is much stronger than the grain farming.
That's a really good point. As those lenders were looking ahead, finding that optimism, the 2-year high in optimism about the future, what were some of the tailwinds that they had on our behalf here in ag?
Well, there's more headwinds, but I'll talk about some of the tailwinds. They're seeing livestock doing pretty well. We're seeing, of course, beef prices up there. The U.S. consumer is still buying beef, still buying pork, and that's the two principal products that from the areas of the country we survey, and that's certainly a tailwind. Although exports are remaining weak, the value of the dollar is coming down. Now that should aid both the manufacturers that we survey and the farmers on behalf, or I should say the bankers on behalf of the farmers. We'll see that as well. A weak dollar is going to be very good for exports for those. Now we'll have to cross our fingers about retaliation. I mean, in other words, the president's talking about raising tariffs, and that you will see some retaliation. So that would be the potential negative there.
Now, one of the stats I recall from last month's RMI, Rural Main Street Index data, was that lenders believe that as many as 25% of farmers might see a negative income this year. Ernie, does that align with sort of how you're looking at the ag industry?
It does, Mike. It is definitely the case, and we'll see that. But now you have to divide it up between the livestock producers and the grain producers. Now, in many cases, they're the same. In other words, a farmer has livestock, that farmer also has grain as well. But on the grain side, 25% are going to be losing, 25% overall are likely to have negative farm income. Now, that comes on the top of 2 bad years, and that would be, of course, 23 and 24. And 25 was looking up until we had this explosion of negative outcomes in terms of tariffs, and also the global economy is slowing down, and that's hitting these rural areas of the midsection of the country.
Absolutely. For folks who want to keep up to speed with your 2 surveys, Ernie, where would you send them for information?
Well, they could go to GossandAssociates.com. That's one place. Also to Creighton University's Hyder College of Business. You can get the results there.
Ernie Goss from Creighton University, thanks for joining us this week.
Thank you, Mike, for having me on.
Farm Progress Broadcast presents This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry. Brought to you by Pioneer.
Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. I'm Mike Pearson. As we continue the show this weekend, now it's time to take a look at the agronomy for your acres. Joining us today is Tyler Richardson. He's a crop consultant in Missouri with Nutrient Ag Solutions. And Tyler, thanks for taking the time to talk with us this week.
Hey, thanks for having me back, Mike.
Now, we caught up back in April. Planting season was ongoing. There were some challenges Missouri growers were dealing with. Now that we're mid-season, how are things looking across your territory?
Everything looks really good. As you can tell behind me, this is a beautiful stand of corn. It's pretty representative of most of north central Missouri, but isn't exactly a telltale sign of what the whole season was like. It's been a cool and wet spring here in Missouri. We've had ample moisture, and while that is a blessing, it doesn't come without its challenges. We've seen a lot of areas to where, planned nitrogen applications at the V8 growth stage of corn were missed, and with all the rain we had in April and May, it put our residual chemistries to the test. And I can tell you now, looking back, anywhere we ran robust rates of chemistry with 2 to 3 modes of action, they have really separated themselves and taken a lot of pressure off the post pass. But all in all, we've got a really good looking crop. There's a lot of optimism across the countryside, and can't wait to see what the rest of the growing season holds.
That's fantastic to hear. Now, you mentioned that ample moisture. Of course, that's kept some growers out of their additional end pass. For folks that are missing some of that nitrogen this time of the season, what's your advice?
Yeah, so one of the biggest objections I get every year to split applied nitrogen is, well, what if I back off my ammonia rate and I miss the boat when it's time to come back with the post pass? And that's a real concern. And a couple of solutions I provide to my customers is, moving up that pass. Maybe we don't back off the ammonia rate quite as much. We plan 100 pounds of AMS pre-plant or at plant, and that is an easier time to get it on. And with the adoption of fungicide continuing to grow, we have products like Maximum Impact that we can put in with our fungicide pass. And at the 1 gallon rate, it provides about 2.5 to 3 pounds of readily available nitrogen to the corn plant at grain fill. It's not a perfect option, but it alleviates some pressure and is a good option.
Absolutely. Keeps the fields rolling forward, which is what we like to see. And you mentioned fungicide there. Of course, farmers are dealing with tighter farm margins across most commodities. Can we still justify that fungicide pass on a crop like this?
Yeah, absolutely. Ever since I started in 2018 with my career, the conversation has changed. And in 2023, I found my first incident of tar spot. Over the last 2 growing seasons, it is pretty much rooted in and taken a foothold in every corn growing county of Missouri. And the approach has changed. Growers are taking a proactive approach with fungicide, and they know with all the money they have invested in this crop, a planned fungicide pass is not necessarily going for the extra bang, but it's protecting the investment they have in the field. And I continue to see adoption increase, and results are just fantastic every year.
That is good to hear, farmers being proactive on the ground to defend those yields. Tyler, if we've got growers who want to learn more about what's available from Nutrient Ag Solutions, where would you send them?
NutrientAgSolutions.com.
Fantastic, folks. Check that out. Tyler Richardson, crop consultant, covers Missouri, northern part of Missouri. Thank you so much for joining us this week.
Thanks for having me again, Mike.
Agriculture meteorologist Greg Solier returns now with his extended farm weather forecast for the country.
This weather segment is brought to you by SprayTech, making your spray applications effective and convenient. Use it once, trust it always. Greg Solier has been watching these pockets of severe weather that have moved across the country. And Greg, from a precipitation standpoint, next week, there are some folks who are going to get plenty. Is that right?
Absolutely. And again, welcome to the SprayTech people into the fine, wonderful world of meteorology. And this time of the year, anything can happen, from the tropics to downpours to nothing at all. But it'll be a fair shake of moisture over the southeastern part of the country. We don't think this is a named feature here or here, but the rain pattern is picking up. I think this is going to be ultimately what swings into the eastern and southeastern Corn Belt in the weeks to come. But in the short term, still some fair to good coverage moisture as the week wears on through the middle part of the week, at least across the Corn Belt. Moisture for the Mid-Atlantic region. Some downpours over the southwestern states. When those come down 1 to 3 inches at a time, that's flash flooding and not much in the way of any organized moisture into the Pacific Northwest. Watch those dry-based fire-producing thunderstorms, Mike, in the Northwest as the week wears on.
What are you watching temperatures as we get into the week of July 14th?
Nothing out of control. We're getting into the tasseling and reproductive stages of corn and beans, and there's no big headlines with heat for now. We think probably through the remainder of the month of July. Some of those fields are already doing just that here into the reproductive mode. Some cool air for the northeast of New England, moisture here and clouds keeping temperatures at bay in the southwest, a little above average out across the west. That big hot ridge of high pressure, just don't see it really significant and major heading through the mid-stretch of the month of July. The rains will be in the southwest, southern plains into the eastern and southern corn belt, and we'll keep an eye on the tropics. A slow evolution, Mike, as July moves into August and then September.
As you get to that third week in July, Greg, is that heat still not an issue for a lot of folks?
Not an issue. Within a few degrees of average to maybe even more like normal across the northern and eastern corn belt. Still below average a bit. It's the monsoon set up over the southwest. A little sliver of the hot ridge showing up over the western part of the states. Otherwise, we've got temperatures above average over the southeastern part of the country. Look at the moisture for the southwestern part of the country. The corn belt into the upper Midwest, eastern states. Are we getting bearish on the drought? Yeah, a little bit here at the Weather Office.
All right. What about temperatures as we push into those first few days of August? Does that ridge come back?
It looks like for at least the ridging standpoint is here. It's strengthening with time. I think later into the month of August and September, yeah, but that could be of benefit with moisture reduction, crop maturity, maybe some early harvest as well. Some cool air for the northeast of New England. Temperatures still a little above average, but manageable across much of the heartland, and normal temps over the southeastern part of the country. Tropics getting busy, but again, it may be kind of a delayed setup there. Moisture for the southwest, parts of the plains, northern and eastern corn belt, beginning the drying process still in the Pacific Northwest.
Our Farm Progress Update is sponsored by Brandt Industries. Lead the field with Brandt's lineup of heavy-duty grain carts and make the most of your harvest season. Visit brandt.ca for more. It's been a busy couple of weeks in the world of international trade, and when it comes to agriculture, North America is pretty tightly intertwined. Recent weeks have seen trade tensions re-erupt with our Canadian friends to the north, and joining me now to discuss it is Andy Castillo. He serves as the technology and equipment editor here at Farm Progress. And Andy, what's going on with our friends and neighbors up in Canada?
Well, if you've been paying attention at all, you've probably heard a lot about dairy. And what's at the heart of this dispute is tariffs in related to imports and exports across the border, particularly exports into Canada. But it's more complex than you might think at first glance. The way that these tariffs work, and every country does this for sensitive industries, the US does it for sugar, is basically a country will accept, in this case Canada, accepts a certain amount of product, and then at that cap, above that cap, tariffs come into play. And sometimes these tariffs are pretty high. But in terms of the US exporting dairy products into Canada, we haven't really reached that quota amount. So it's more complex than you'd think.
So they've got these high tariffs once they import enough. They haven't hit that, so we're not paying those high tariffs as of yet, but they're still out there if the Canadians did start buying lots of dairy. Is that kind of the lay of the land?
Yeah, and more or less countries do this to control the amount of imports they get. And they do that to regulate and to protect sensitive industries. And as I said, the US does this with a lot of different products, as does every other country.
That's so true. Now, so that's the dairy aspect of the trade concerns that have arisen there. But is there more on the radar than just the dairy issues, Andy?
Indeed. I mean, these tariff disputes, and I don't just say it with Canada, globally, these tariff disputes are going to hit agriculture, but maybe in sort of some sideways ways. And as somebody that covers technology, I've been watching this pretty closely. Countries that import or export components like sensors or cameras or the technology that drives modern machines, when those individual components are tariffed, it sends up the price of the whole machine.
That makes a lot of sense. Of course, you can't raise the price of components without raising the cost of the overall machine. And Andy, this is an issue you have been tracking since the election as this trade war has heated up. It has had big impacts on machinery prices and technology accessibility. As you look out over the summer, I imagine you'll continue to cover this. Where can our viewers go to keep up with the work you do and the writings you have about this aspect of the ag economy?
Well, you can search my name in Farm Progress, and I will say that you should probably track this because once prices go up, they're probably not going to come down because consumers get used to this type of pricing. And, in the long term, that might be a concern.
It could indeed. Sticky prices are tough to bring back down. Andy Castillo, Farm Progress Technology and Equipment Editor, thanks for joining us this week.
Thanks so much for having me.
Now on This Week in Agribusiness, it's Max's Tractor Shed, where we spotlight another great American farm tractor. An outstanding tractor collection is even more so, I figure, if it is displayed in an outstanding way. Well lit, organized, clean building. I'll show you one. It's mostly orange, in Max's Tractor Shed, brought to you by Lundell Plastics. Our friend Vance Lundell and his team have worked for some 4 decades to serve the needs of farmers with a line of innovative products. You ought to see it. Take a look at LundellPlastics.com. Well, it's the season of the gathering of the orange. I think they've already had one in Missouri. There's one out east yet to come. The Alice Chalmers folks get together, but here is the gathering of the orange. Well, mostly orange. In Illinois, it's Alice Chalmers for sure. Here's a yellow D21. You might have seen some of those at the Half Century of Progress 2 years ago, and certainly there were orange D21s in that unforgettable display at the Half Century of Progress 2023. But they have a bunch of other legendary Alice Chalmers models at the DeClercq display, Hillsdale, Illinois. Shar and Todd DeClercq have a WD-45, of course. What do you think? Maybe the most popular Alice ever? I'm not sure. Somebody can tell me what they think. And then they have a 190 and a 200. Look at the chrome exhausts on those tractors. But the well-lit, neat building only spotlights even better those great tractors worthy of attention. And Shar and Todd DeClercq's display at Hillsdale, Illinois. You see, I'm wearing my American Tractor Museum shirt to remind you, if you're traveling through the heart of the country, maybe on a vacation, you're not far from St. Louis, go down about an hour and a half south to Perryville, Main Street in Perryville. The American Tractor Museum, check out their hours and everything else, AmericanTractorMuseum.com. Check out Mark's stock right now.
Well, hello, Max. We've got a great lineup of equipment selling this upcoming week. In fact, 3 very large John Deere dealership groups have come together to put on a July 10th John Deere partnership auction. Van Wall Equipment, Inc. They will have 25 items on this July 10th sale featuring John Deere 8RX 410 tractors, 8R 370 mechanical front tractors, S780 combines. P&K Midwest, they will have John Deere 333G compact track loaders, a John Deere 2660 vertical tillage tool, John Deere R4038 self-propelled sprayers, and more John Deere combines. Western Equipment LLC, with their locations in Oklahoma and Texas, will sell John Deere mower conditioners and round balers, John Deere R4045 self-propelled sprayers, John Deere S780 combines, a John Deere 9470 RX quad track tractor, and a John Deere 4066M compact utility tractor. And mark your calendars for Wednesday, July the 16th, as a very large sale in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, 616 Industrial, featuring some outstanding construction equipment, featuring a 2017 John Deere 544K Series 2 wheel loader with only 662 hours. All the details are on BigIron.com.
Our FFA Chapter Tribute is brought to you by Gehringoff. Check out the new XFR 50 Draper with 3 times more flexibility than the closest competitor at Gehringoff.com. Gehringoff, proudly built in the American heartland. This week, we're getting to know a team member from the Tennessee State FFA. Joining us now is Ari Moda. She is serving as the Tennessee FFA State Reporter. And Ari, fill us in. Did you grow up on a farm in Tennessee?
So I was born and raised in the city of Nashville, but when I was 10, I moved into a farm where I began my agricultural experience. So I had a unique opportunity to experience both the urban side of Tennessee, but also the rural side.
That's probably really important as more and more folks move to Tennessee and it continues to urbanize. And so what was it that made you want to be a part of FFA?
So I remember that I had accidentally signed up for the agri-science course in school, and so in the state of Tennessee, everyone that is in agriculture education is automatically an FFA member. So I didn't have to do anything extra to become an FFA member. So I took that as an advantage, and I started becoming active just because of the affiliation.
That's fantastic. And now, of course, serving in state leadership. And what are you excited about with your new role as a state reporter?
So I've always loved social media and communications, and so just being able to be in this role where I can control the social media in the presence of Tennessee FFA online has been amazing. And as a little girl, I've always filmed videos of myself, and so just being able to use those strengths and skills that I have and use that for Tennessee FFA has been truly amazing. But additionally, I've been able to use that for national FFA as well as an FFA in the USA reporter as well.
Wow, so taking those skills that you've built over years and putting them to work for the FFA at the state and national level, that's what we love to see going forward. Ari Mota, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us here this week.
Of course, thank you so much.
Colby Ag Tech is brought to you by AGI, supporting your expertise with industry-leading grain handling, storage, conditioning, and monitoring solutions. AGI, we're right there with you. Chad Colby's travels this week took him over to Decatur, Illinois. He was able to visit the Farm Progress Show grounds before the crowds arrive.
Now that it's July, it's time to start talking a little more seriously about our 2025 Farm Progress Show. As you can see behind me, I'm here on site in Decatur, Illinois, and we're looking forward to a great show. One of the big comments we get all the time is, what do the crops look like here in Decatur? As you can see from these drone shots, they look fantastic. The team at the Farm Progress Show has done a great job getting the plots in and making sure that they're going to be ready for some exciting field demonstrations here at this year's Farm Progress Show. You can expect all the same things we've had over the years. Lots of harvesting demonstrations and, of course, big tillage demonstrations. Speaking of demonstrations, have you seen some of the new smart sprayer technology? We had some on a recent episode here in the tech segment. You'll be able to see that, as well as expanded autonomy and, of course, sprayer drones. Talking to the folks from Farm Progress this week, big numbers at this year's show in terms of vendors and a lot more expanded areas called the varied industry tents. If you've been to the show the last few years, you've seen that those areas have expanded greatly. And here in Decatur, they're adding even more because they sold out of the initial area. The other thing they told me is we're about 2 weeks away from this area turning into Tent City. And it won't be too long before here in Decatur, Illinois, we're going to host the Farm Progress Show. In the coming weeks, you can expect to hear more from the team here on This Week in Agribusiness as to what you're going to see at this year's show. And you can bet I'll be back here in Decatur to share more of it with you. For This Week in Agribusiness, I'm Chad Colby.
Thank you, Chad. And of course, folks, you can visit farmprogressshow.com to get tickets, get registered, and get all the information you need for a great Farm Progress Show in Decatur. Well, there's one agricultural market that has seen no shortage of excitement over the past several years, and that's the beef and cattle markets. Producers out in the countryside continue to receive record or near record prices for their livestock, but there are some threats on the horizon. Chief amongst them is New World screwworm. This parasitic fly has been moving closer to our country through Mexico over the past several months, and a lot of stakeholders have had their eye on it. Joining me now is Colin Woodall. He serves as the CEO of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. And Colin, this is an issue you folks have been working on since we heard about it last November, right?
That's right. So we heard about this right before Thanksgiving when the New World screwworm fly was first detected in southern Mexico. And at that point in time, we knew we had a significant problem on our hands.
And where does this problem develop? I mean, what's the concern if an American livestock operation should see New World screwworm?
So the concern is the parasitic nature of the larva. So the fly comes in, it lays its eggs. The larvae then use two little hooks on the front of their mouths to basically screw in or bore into the flesh of the animal. And at that point in time, they really do just start eating the animal from the inside out. And if not treated, it can kill head of cattle within 7 to 10 days. So this is a significant animal health concern for us.
It is. And of course, the USDA, the U.S. government, has been very active in building up some defenses. But Colin, can you fill us in on where these defenses stand, these sterile fly facilities? When should they be operational?
So there is one in Mexico that USDA is helping fund a transition from being a fruit fly facility to a New World screwworm facility. We expect that could come online about a year from now. So it takes a long time, just given all the infrastructure required to produce this particular fly. And the sterile insect technology is key, is because fortunately, Mother Nature gave us an opportunity, and that is the female fly only mates once in its life cycle. So that's how we're going to be able to combat it and ultimately eradicate it again.
That makes sense. So it mates with a sterile fly. There's no offspring. There's no subsequent lineage. Now, of course, we've got about a year until that fly facility is operational. We've also got one coming here in the United States. But in the meantime, we're seeing the border with Mexico begin to reopen. From NCBA's perspective, do you think we're at a point to begin bringing cattle back in from Mexico?
So we are very supportive of what Secretary Rollins did in making her announcement for the phased-in reopening of the border, starting in Arizona and working its way to Texas. We had a protocol in place after the arrival of the fly back in November that we felt worked really well. And we had cooperation both from the Mexican government and USDA personnel to ensure that those cattle were well inspected multiple times before they ever made it into the United States. So we don't believe that the New World screwworm will arrive in the United States just because of trade. We know that we can protect ourselves because of the protocols that we put in place. So we are supportive of the decision the Secretary made.
All right, we're making progress here in this cattle industry. We'll continue to watch this fight with the New World screwworm as it goes on, because it's not going to be over anytime soon. NCBA, no doubt, an important partner in that fight. CEO Colin Woodall, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Thank you, Mike.
We'll continue tracking the New World screwworm as it continues to cause troubles to the cattle industry. It could also impact livestock and sheep producers as well. Thank you for joining us this week. Be sure to catch us next time, right here for This Week in Agribusiness. This Week in Agribusiness is recorded in the Strauss Studios. For more than 70 years and 3 generations, Strauss has been manufacturing high-performance German-engineered workwear, work boots, and safety equipment. Prepare for the next growing season at Strauss.com.
This Week in Agribusiness is produced by 22 Creative Group and has been a presentation of Farm Progress Broadcast. We invite you to visit us online at agbizweek.com.